This week on the Tech ONTAP podcast, we talk about a new performance analytics tool at NetApp, OATS.
Welcome to the Tech ONTAP podcast with Justin Parisi, Glenn Sizemore, and Sully the Monster.
I love NetApp.
Oh, yeah.
Hello and welcome to the Tech ONTAP podcast. My name is Justin Parisi. In the studio with me today is Mr. Andrew Sullivan. Hi.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I am fantastic.
Good. Glad to hear it. This is actually episode 2 that we were doing today. We were doing back-to-back today. We are pulling the noontime oil.
I'd like to say it's a marathon podcasting session, but we don't really do that.
I didn't provide lunch.
Well, you're fired.
I totally am fired. Glenn knew that, so he didn't actually show up today, so he's on the WebEx. Hi, Glenn.
I have lunch, unlike the fine gentleman in the room.
I know. I didn't plan ahead accordingly. So I'm sure that the guys that have joined us today have already eaten lunch. So we'll go around the room and introduce them. Today we're going to be covering something called OATS, and we'll let them describe what that is in a second. But let's start with my gentleman on the left here.
Hi, my name is Matt Hambrick.
What do you do here, Matt?
Oh, what do I do here? Yes, I'm a Director of Performance Engineering here at NetApp.
Okay, what does a Director of Performance Engineering do?
I have a team of software engineers that improve both the performance on-box of ONTAP and also do analytics off-box to make it go faster.
Excellent. And Greg Keller, hi.
Hi, how you doing? Greg Keller, Senior Director of ONTAP Performance Engineering. So Matt's part of my team, and so we not only do developing code for ONTAP, including the piece of work that Matt mentioned, but we also have a set of performance analysts that go in and look at the performance of new features as they're being developed, as well as if we see field issues, we work with the field to try to address those.
All right, and last but not least, actually the most, really, because we actually were going to do this on Friday, and they stopped me, and they're like, nope, we got to have this guy. Fred
Thank
Pfeiffer.
you.
Hi, Fred.
Hi. So, yes, I'm Fred Pfeiffer. I'm the OATS architect. So I work with a team of developers into building this tool to analyze performance, to troubleshoot problems on our clusters.
Okay, so let's just start off with the first question. OATS, what is this thing? Is it like a bucket of grain that I'm going to devour for my performance needs? What is this? Why are we calling it OATS?
So OATS is a ONTAP analytics and telemetry service. So long name, a lot of words, but it has a simple purpose. What we want to be able to do is look at big data type problems and net them down to something that a customer can deal with. Kind of came out of the some of the problems we were looking at several years ago. We have, ONTAP is the number one storage operating system in the world, right? So there's huge numbers of data points out there for us to collect data, and we collect thousands of data points from every ONTAP system. Internally, we have thousands of systems ourselves that we're running tests on, whether it's performance tests or functional tests or system tests. Developers are using them all the time as well. So with all this data, we had some opportunities that we really weren't taking advantage of. So we had some technologies such as the archiver, the counter manager archiver, which is a set of performance and other counters we collect in a set of files, and we'll talk more about that later. We had some tools we were developing internally to go look at systems that were under test to see if we could see performance anomalies happening and see if we could correlate those to issues that we saw, our customers were seeing. And we said other technologies that we're developing in terms of tooling and put this together. So I kind of threw this out to a set of engineers saying, hey, I think there's an opportunity for us to think about these problems differently. Tell me what you think about. And we put together an organization to go solve that. And that's where Matt comes into play.
So we had this team go off and look at how we could take the most advantage of the internal data, right? We were looking largely at QA systems and taking advantage of all that QA data internal to NetApp, and pulled together a system of telemetry dashboards and other ways of looking at that data, analyzing it using advanced graphing. And when we presented that to some of the leadership here at NetApp, they came back to us and told us this is really neat, but I think that you have a better advantage if you take this and turn it into something that can be implemented in AWS and use the scale of AWS and the ability to point more CPUs at this to do machine learning and AI on this data. And that was the next step that we took. So we took a very small team of engineers, about 4 or 5 engineers, and gave them a challenge of, you have 6 weeks. go turn this that you thought you had, and we're going to turn it around and turn it into something that is customer friendly and can be done in AWS in the next 6 weeks.
And we paid them in beer.
Yes.
So
Not enough.
standard monetary reimbursement here. At NetApp.
Yes. We carved them off. We put them in a secret conference room that no one else could find and said, you have 6 weeks to go do this. See what you can do.
So you've called it oats. Why not hops? I mean, if you're paying them in beer.
Because the acronym didn't work right.
There you go.
Make it work. We could do that. Anyway, so we have a performance gathering tool already at NetApp that we usually use in support and, even internally is PerfStat. So how does OATS tie into that, or does it replace it entirely?
At some point in the future, it will likely replace PerfStat entirely. So PerfStat is a tool that has been around for many, many years, more than 10 probably at this point in time, and it has aged poorly. And software ages over time, and it's difficult to maintain. And PerfStat is in that state now. So as we're looking forward on how do we solve performance problems in the field going forward, we need a new tool chain. We have many more nodes that we have to deal with at this point in time. And now that ONTAP supports up to 24 nodes in a cluster, that's a different sort of scale of analytics than what we had previously. We have many more cores than we had previously when PerfStat was first developed. So it's just not designed to scale to that sort of visualization or understanding. So looking forward, we're looking at completely re-architecting that, basing it off the Countermeasure Archiver, which can bring all the data back into NetApp or send it to AWS cleanly, and provide modern analytics on top of that. And that's really where the open source vision that we have, where we're using open source packages predominantly, comes in.
So you're telling me a Perl script that was written for a single node architecture isn't scalable?
No, surprising.
Weird.
So can you walk me through a scenario here, right? So I am a customer. I'm having some sort of performance issue. Historically, the response would be, okay, generate a PerfStat archive, right? Send it in, and it'll be analyzed, and we'll figure out what's happening inside of there. So leveraging OATS, how does that change?
So there's an underlying technology here, the Countermeasure Archiver, which packages all the data in a much more fine-grained fashion than what we had previously. What we had prior with PerfStat is it had to do individual API calls into ONTAP in order to bring back the data. And those API calls, depending on the type of performance problem you had, might not align and bring all the data back cleanly for you. Because if you are up against a performance wall and have maxed out all your CPUs, asking the system to do more to give you data back doesn't always work cleanly, right? So the archiver is a package that is always there, always available. It just needs to be sent off as one binary file. Okay, and there's two different paths that can go down. We have the ability to do on-demand archiver gathering into our support center today, and that support center can grab that data and have that package of the archiver to apply different visualization to it. And OATS is a visualizer that can either be pointed either at what we have internal, or a customer can stand it up themselves in AWS, right? So standardize on the data, underlying data format, and then provide tools on top of that.
Got you. So underneath the covers, what's happening here? So there's two things that I want to ask about here, right? One, you said that OATS is something that we are always running internally, right? That our support team, as well as I'm sure our engineers, right, the guys way down in the weeds in ONTAP, can pull those performance archiver metrics, shove it up into OATS that's running somewhere inside of or accessible to NetApp, as well as our customers can actually stand up this architecture and look at that themselves.
Our customers can stand up this architecture themselves in AWS.
Okay.
Right? So that this is something that is available today on AWS. You go to AWS and purchase it from them, and they will stand it up and charge you only the cost of the AWS instance. NetApp gets no money back from this. It's just the cost of the CPU and the storage that AWS will
Gotcha.
charge.
So I want to ask about that a little bit more in a minute, but I wanted to go to Fred. And so Fred, can you tell me about what's actually happening underneath the covers here, right? So whether or not you all know, right, I do a lot with containers. I do a lot with sort of, the microservices, DevOps, right? And a lot of these things are using like the ELK stack, right, in order to do log analysis and analytics underneath the covers, right, collecting performance stats and all that other stuff. Well, this is, similar of doing big data analytics, right, real-time analytics on the data that's coming in order to generate information.
So, you're already pretty familiar with this architecture. So typically what we have is on-premise near the clusters of the customers, we have a small container called the data collector. This is very small, doesn't require much at all. And this will connect to your cluster with a read-only user, extract the EMS logs and extract the CCMA files, and forward that to AWS to S3 for storage, and SQS to post a message saying, hey, you've got something to do. Now we go to AWS part, and we've got this KPM engine. So KPM means key performance metric. And it will go take the CCMA files, ask for a translation of that CCMA file into a format more readable, HDF5, and calculate or extract single counters out of those archives. At the same time, let's go down technical, so EMS logs will be forwarded via Logstash and parsed and pushed into Elasticsearch database. So now we've got the logs inside Elasticsearch and the KPM engine calculating all of those metrics and pushing that as well into Elasticsearch. Finally, at the end, you can use whatever you want to create reports, but we are delivering dashboards through Grafana. So Grafana connects to Elasticsearch and display your performance data and your logs, entries, errors, warnings on top of it so that you can correlate problems. Like you've got a big spike in latency. Did you have a problem on your cluster reported by EMS at the same time? So that's the chain. Of course, at the end, you've got end user with his browser looking at stuff.
That's very cool. So Fred, you mentioned that we're ingesting all of this data from the archiver, right? And then OATS takes that and a set of KPMs in order to extract that out. But I also heard that customers are able to potentially add in their own log streams, their own data inside of there. But that's for external applications. If I, as a customer, am interested in specific performance metrics, can I leverage OATS for that?
Sure. So there are multiple ways that you can integrate outside applications. So let's talk metrics first. We can extract single counters out of CCMA files. That's the first step. And if the list of counters that you have is not enough, just go to the administration of OATS and set up for additional counters that you want to extract and report on. In addition to that, we also have calculations. And calculations are block of code written in Python that we don't have exclusivity of writing. So the customer can do that himself as well. Create calculations, aggregating multiple KPMs together, multiple counters together, and producing a new time series that you want to report on. After that, we already talked about this earlier, but you can include logs from outside applications. And this is because we are using open source software behind OATS, like Logstash, like Elasticsearch, and Grafana and so forth. So because we are using those open source platforms, we can actually connect and use all the plugins that you can find on the market.
Very cool. So it's not just limited to what NetApp has provided out of the box. I can go in and modify it as I need.
Absolutely. And we have also one of our customers who is an early adopter, decided that he didn't need the Elasticsearch that we were providing, so he's using his own. So you can slice and dice your installation based on what you currently have. If your Elasticsearch is already on your system, already processing other data from outside sources, why not just push additional data from your cluster into it? So that's the point.
Very cool. So what kind of metrics can we, or what type of graphs are we seeing on the dashboard? I mean, I would imagine the obvious things like volume latency, protocol latency are there. Are there any sort of unexpected things?
No, so we started at first with the very big basics. Latency, network, disk, performance CPU, that kind of things. And we put that per cluster and per node. And on top of that, we did also a more, overview level of those, like cluster latency. So cluster latency is not a counter that is reported. This is an aggregate. And this aggregate is being calculated with formulas coming from our performance analyst to make sure that this number means something. So all of this is done via Python calculation behind the scene for those specific KPMs, while others are coming directly from counters, CCMA. So at this moment, with the default dashboards that we have, you have standards, usual metrics that you are used to do or to see every day. After that, we had an additional effort to connect OATS to Cloud ONTAP. And Cloud ONTAP people had a very specific needs. They wanted to see the space, headroom, what's remaining on my cluster. So we had performance analysts working with them to extract new KPMs, create new metrics, and creating new dashboards to see exactly what is your optimal level versus what is your actual utilization on your storage. So we are basing our new dashboards on customer needs, on internal needs, and we are creating those dashboards as we go. So we don't really decide what will be there, so customer will.
Very interesting. So a minute ago, you mentioned a phrase that always piques my attention: machine learning.
Mm-hmm.
So are we applying machine learning techniques then going forward in order to predict performance issues, or?
Yeah, so that is the roadmap going forward. As we've looked around, one of the problems we've had fundamentally with performance, I think generally the biggest problem with performance in the industry is that you have to find the right expert to solve your individual problem, right? You need to find the queuing expert, you need to find the networking expert that can solve the problem that you have today. And what we're looking at with OATS is creating an infrastructure that allows us to both share the knowledge of individual humans, but also expand that into machine learning against the data set. And so we have machine learning experts that are working with us, that are on my team today, that are looking at how do we take the OATS infrastructure forward and apply machine learning to that. It's not there today, but it's something that I expect to see in the next quarter.
So you mentioned that your team is responsible for interacting with core ONTAP engineering for helping to resolve performance issues. So can you tell us anything about the impact that leveraging OATS versus the older system or systems has had?
So at this point, we have a set of 6-7 customers that are actually running OATS instances today, and big name customers by and large, and they're giving us feedback and evaluation. So at this point, what it allows us to do is allows our analysts to look at the data in a much different way than they have in the past, and we're getting new insights. What that also allows us to do is to feedback into Fred on what's the next set of KPMs we want to add, because as we learn, we find maybe there's a better way of calculating, or there's a calculation that's missing that will give them further insight. So it's clearly making a difference, and we'll continue to expand, as Fred said, on the KPMs as well as other types of dashboards. The other point I want to make is that there's no reason that other logs beyond just what we have on Box could be used. So we could get logs from applications, for example, as well, because often the application or even a network switch may cause performance issue, and having the interaction of all of those together in a time series format allows us to do that analysis.
Yeah, that's really cool to me, because I actually gave a presentation at Insight last year on VMware and networking. And usually the way I describe networking with VMware, networking between the storage and the virtualization environment, is it's a giant black hole, right? I have storage on one side, I have a virtualization environment on the other side. I can see individual metrics from each other's perspective, but there's that black hole in the middle. Right. So having some sort of tool that's able to bring all of those together, to look at those things in a correlated timeline, right, and be able to make sense of things is a hugely powerful asset.
So you mentioned that using this is free, but where would I find it, and how would I get access to it?
So it is available in the AWS Marketplace today. We also have some video on YouTube that will link to that and allow you to go find it.
So one other point I was going to make is that as you mentioned, we were looking at containers as a containerized implementation. There are pieces of this that can be used for different applications. So it's a set of technologies that we've stitched together to create OATS, but each of these pieces can be individually used. And so other teams in NetApp are actually taking those pieces and using them for their own use. And
we have customers doing that as well, yeah. Right? So we've delivered this as a service-oriented architecture, and we have some of those big-name customers that Greg was talking about earlier who aren't interested in OATS per se. They have their own visualization framework for their data center, and in that framework, they're showing what the heating and the cooling is in the entire data center, and they want to see storage performance in that same graphical format. And for that, there's an underpinning, or one of the applications inside of OATS is called Trafero. And that gives the customer the ability to take the countermeasure archiver data, unpack that in a way that they can graph it themselves in whatever framework they want to.
So I have to say that, and I'll be marketing for just a tiny moment, right? I think this is a fantastic personification of NetApp, adopting that data management company philosophy, not just a generic storage company. So are you all talking about this at Insight? Are you going to be doing presentations? Are we going out and evangelizing for the capabilities here?
We're doing a lot of evangelization right now. I mentioned the YouTube video earlier. This podcast is an example of that. We're talking to many people inside of the NetApp sales organization to help us find customers who might be good fits for OATS in the field. A decision on whether we're going to be at Insight or not is something that we'll probably sort out in the next couple of weeks.
So what are the criteria for being a good fit for leveraging OATS?
Right now, we're in AWS. We're looking for customers who have an experience with ONTAP, not first-time users, but people who have ONTAP clusters who are trying to solve problems in their data center that they don't quite understand right now, that seem to have a performance bent. Right, and those are the types of customers that we've engaged with so far, and we're looking to grow that number going forward. But still, we're in the very early stages, and as we were talking about, we're looking to update OATS every 6 weeks or thereabouts, and so we're still trying to find those customers who have a problem to go solve, are willing to engage with engineering on that problem, as engineering tries to help them find resolution, and then we can tie that learning back into OATS on the far side.
And one point I want to make on that is that so OATS is targeted at ONTAP 9 customers, right? We don't support customers prior to that, but the good news is ONTAP 9 has been very, very rapidly adopted. So we have a lot of targets for that, but it's an ONTAP 9 capability.
So have you been engaging support at all, trying to get them in the mix as well and educating them on this? Or?
Yes. We are heavily engaged with technical directors and directors inside of support, showing them OATS, working with them on how they can use that going forward.
You say sowing your oats?
Showing them OATS.
Sure. As well as the team that's responsible for the data lake and ASUP, right? They're heavily involved as well as using the technologies.
You were talking about containers a bit before. So our current architecture in AWS has one container at least, which is Trafero. It's a service that Matt was talking about translation, CCMA to HDF. We have, of course, a container on the on-premise side, which forwards all of those files to our system. Now we are modifying this architecture right now to make it all containers, microservice architecture, pure and simple, so that in our next iteration, we will be able to move OATS on a container orchestration system. At first, AWS ECS to start with, and then Kubernetes or anything else that you have access to. And the goal, of course, is if you've got a problem over multiple clusters that harm tens of nodes, then you can push all of this data and scale your system at will. And we will have access to all of this data to troubleshoot the problem. So that's our way to go forward with modern architectures.
That's fantastic news, right? There's yet another case of inside of NetApp, right, leveraging current modern technology in order to drive things forward. The storage grade guys are doing the same, right? You can deploy storage grade inside of a containerized environment completely today. So I think it's fantastic, right? I may or may not be a little biased, but great news regardless.
So one other point I wanted to make is that we have a suite of monitoring tools that NetApp provides. We have on-command insight, right? We have performance manager. We have a set of tools that are provided. So those are true monitoring tools that customers can utilize for a complete suite. And OATS is really targeted at the performance supportability problems, whether a customer on-prem or through our support site. So there is that complete set of suite of tools we have.
So the on-command suite is more of your internalized self-monitoring, self-support, and your OATS is more of your I've hit a problem, I need NetApp's help figuring it out, whether it's through machine learning or through supports engagement, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Pretty much.
All right, so I think that's about it for OATS. I mean, we've got a pretty good handle on what it is, and it sounds like a great start. And every 6 weeks we expect updates.
Yes.
So make it so, Matt.
That we will.
All right, so we're going to go around the room and again reintroduce everybody, make sure everybody knows who was talking and what they do. And we'll also give you contact information on how to reach the gentlemen and ladies behind OATS. So starting with Matt Hambrick.
Hi, this is Matt Hambrick, Director of Performance Engineering.
Okay, and Greg Keller.
Yep, Greg Keller. It's greg.keller@netapp.com or at KellerGC on Twitter.
And Fred Pfeiffer.
Yes, I'm Fred Pfeiffer, and if you want more information about OATS, you can go to ng-oats-info@netapp.com.
All right, that music tells me it's time to go. If you'd like to get in touch with us, send us an email to podcast@netapp.com or send us a tweet at NetApp. As always, if you'd like to subscribe, find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher, or via TechOnTapPodcast.com. If you like the show today, leave us a review. On behalf of the entire Tech on Tap podcast team, and Greg Keller, and Matt Hambrick, and Fred Pfeiffer, thanks for listening. That's good stuff, OATS.
Yeah, we're doing some really cool stuff.
Yeah, I like that. I like that we're actually using the stuff that we're telling everyone else to use, too. Containers and cloud-based and everything. It's good.
It's almost like we know what we're doing.
It's almost. But then but we have you involved, so...
Is it just me that's getting off on this?
Weren't you just talking about imposter syndrome?
Yes. I have that every day.